Barakatay Hawa, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is GMS Biblical History Chronicles, Kings of Persia and the Realm of Grecia. And pretty much this comes through a video I was watching. I ran into this page yesterday, Birmingham Brews. And I'm not positive, but I the only group that I know that uses the term brews that I'm aware of was formerly the One Body in Yahushai, which I don't know what they call themselves now. They're all, they all mixed up. They got so many weird doctrines that I don't even know what they teach now, and neither do I care. But this individual here put this video up about a month ago almost. It says 4 weeks ago. Now I don't know if this was a re-upload or if it's a fresh video that he just did. And pretty much, if you do the research on Daniel chapter 11, and you look up the right sources, you will find the breakdown to the book, to the chapter. But if you don't know the breakdown, if you don't have at least an idea, you're going to get lost, because you have some individuals today that teach that's talking about China, and it's talking about Russia, and it's talking about this, it's talking about that, and all kind of madness. Daniel chapter 11 has already been fulfilled. And this individual here, I know that he watched a former One West, group, namely GMS, because we're the main ones that go through that. But the first couple of verses, pretty much, if you do the research, like I said, you'll be able to find out what it is. Now, in this video, when he first started, and this one in particular, I believe it was part 1, it's about an hour and almost 7 minutes long. I watched about an hour of it this morning around 3. Woke up, I couldn't go back to sleep. And what made me realize that he got it from us, or for at least from a former One West group, is the fact that he used the term, Alexander the Great, which I call, Alexander the Creep. And I've never heard anyone else say that except for One West. So I know he got this from One West, but he didn't give credit where he got it from. He said somebody asked him a question, and he did the research, and he got all the information, and which I'm not saying he didn't do the research, because he brought out some information in here, which shows you that he was doing some studying, but he didn't come up with this on his own. I'll just put it like that. Now, the one thing that he said in here, which he got the kings correct, I was like, all right, cool. He got the kings correct, the first 4 kings of the Persians, and he got that correct. But then he starts going off into that the Grecians were the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Judah. And I said, what? Now, the Spartans were Israelites. They were known in the Apocrypha as the Lacedaemonians. And you had Israelites scattered around there, but this was prior to the Hellenization of the nation of Israel. So you did have Jakes that were into the Greek customs prior to being Hellenized, fully Hellenized during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. So the Spartans were one group specifically, and he did go into the Apocrypha and showed, as we've gone before over, to show you that the Lacedaemonians are the Spartans. Some versions say Lacedaemonians of the Apocrypha. Some versions say Spartans, because they're one and the same. He brought out some information about the Corinthians, which you did have Jakes in Corinth. This is why the Apostle Paul, wrote to the Corinthians. But his mistake is, which I knew he was going to go into, his mistake is that he's using the term Grecian in Daniel the 11th chapter and tying it or trying to tie it with the New Testament in the book of Acts. He went specifically to Acts 11. We usually go to Acts 6, which Acts 6 is, I think it appears like 2 or 3 times in the book of Acts, dealing with the Grecians. So that's his way of saying that this was the Persians fighting against Jake. And it was not the case, even though you did have Israelites that were fighting the Persians. Because when we read in Daniel 11, it's talking about all of the realm of Grecia. All right. So Daniel 11:1, it says, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, which was of the seed of the Mede. There's another verse in chapter 9 that speaks about him being of the seed of the Medes. He was about 62 years old. He pretty much was under the authority of Cyrus the Great, the first, because the Persians, which came in last, because the Medes were already a force to be reckoned with. You know, they helped the Babylonians take down certain strongholds. You know, they was out there getting it in. But then when Cyrus came in, he subjugated the Medes underneath the Persians, and they became known as the Middle Persian Empire or the Middle Persian Empire. All right, so he was working for Cyrus, and he's the one that went into Babylon and actually, killed, the king, the vice regent, or the standing king, and the rulers of the kingdom at that time, and just pretty much took over. It was like a hostile takeover. There was no war fought. They just rolled right up in there. All right. It says, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, because at this point you had Cyrus, pretty much, that was ruling, because he had conquered all of those realms, or he was conquering those realms, and he actually took over the Medes. He took over the Babylonians. He took over the Greek states in Asia Minor, what they call Asia Minor. So he had established the Persian Empire's presence. All right, we go to Isaiah chapter 45 and 1. It says, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, right? And when you go to this word anointed, is the word Mashiach, which means anointed. All right. And, this is an argument I had with a clown years ago. I don't remember who it was, because he tried to tell me that King David was the Messiah because, there's a scripture somewhere in the Old Testament, I can't remember where it speaks about King David being the anointed or something like that. And I said, well, Cyrus is also called the anointed. Does that mean that he's the anointed too? And I hit him with this scripture, hit him with the Hebrew, and he just backed off. But anyways, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, meaning this is the chosen vessel among the Persians, the Iranians, that the Lord used to bring in this beast. All right, which we read about also in Daniel the 7th chapter, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. Right, and that's what he did. The Lord was with him to subdue nations. Why? Because it was the Persians, the Middle Persian Empire's time to reign, specifically in the order of the Persians now, because the Persians became a higher force, even though the Medes came first. And I will loose the loins of kings, and that's what happened, because these kings that came up against him, the kings of Egypt and Lydia and Babylon, didn't stand a chance against him, because they were like shaking of a fig tree when the figs are ripe, and the figs just came falling right off. Why? Because the Lord loosed the loins of those kings, because it was time for them to go down, and it was time for Cyrus and the Persian Empire to be established. Hence the Middle Persian Empire. Just like today, you see Esau falling, because it is time for Esau to go down. It is their time to go down. So no matter what they do, they're not going to be able to protect themselves like they would have at one time when they were coming up into power and when they were established in power, because it's time for them to go down. And the same goes for every empire that was ever established. They had their beginnings, their middles, and their endings. And when the endings came, they did not have the force that they had when they first came into power, because the Lord had taken that spirit from them. And just like he's taken the spirit away from America, Babylon the Great, to open before him the two-leaf gates, and the gates shall not be shut, meaning this is when he took down the Babylonian Empire. They associate this to the Ishtar Gate, and as some of the history goes, secular history, the King Belshazzar, which was a vice regent, Belshazzar, he left the gates open because he heard some commotion. This is, according to the history. And then this is how Darius was able to get in there in his army, so on and so forth, and took them over, put them to death, so on and so forth. All right. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. Right. And the Lord allowed them to take down the ancient Babylonian Empire, or what they call the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which was an extension of the ancient Babylonian Empire. All right. And you could read on the rest. Just wanted to get the point. So going back here, and now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, because you already had Cyrus. So the 3 kings that stood up in Persia, were Cambyses the second. You had Pseudo-Smyrna or Bardia. You had Darius the first. And then the 4th one after that was Xerxes. All right. So we have here a list of the Achaemenid dynasty. You see Cyrus the Great. So during the time when Cyrus was in power, because Darius the Mede was the one that took down the Babylonian stronghold, you had 3 kings that would come after him. It would be Cambyses, which was his son, 529 to 522. Smerdis, Bardia, it says here brother, 522. And they call him Pseudo-Smerdis because he was not supposed to be there. He usurped that authority. Then you had Darius the First the Great, 521 to 486. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe he's the one that put Daniel in the lion's den, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correct. And then you had Xerxes the First, which was the son of Darius the First the Great, 485 to 465 BC. So in this time frame here that this scripture in Daniel 11 is speaking about, this was not the time when the Greeks or the Greek Empire was going to be established, but they were already in the realm. Because we're going to read this again, but I want to get the list of the Macedonian kings. Now, I've made this statement before through the Spirit, which is why personally what I believe, these are the kings of Macedonia. And I believe this is how Esau got into Europe, so-called Europe. Because Philip II, we know, was an Edomite. Alexander III, the Great, we know was an Edomite. These were Edomites here. And it's possible that some of these or all of them were all Edomites. Or they could have been Japhet to a certain point, because it goes back, Karaunus, I believe, goes back to like the 800 BC era. And if you know the history of Israel and Edom, the Edomites revolted from under the hands of Israel pursuant to prophecy. And that took place around 900 something, going into 800 something BC. This is after Solomon's reign. Down the line, one of the kings of Judah that the Edomites revolted from under, that was around 800 BC or so, around there. And this is around the time when these Macedonian kings started coming up in Macedonia, which is in the northern part of Greece. Now, some of them could have been Japhet, and Esau just came in and took over at a certain point, or they could have all been Edomites. The history is not super clear on it. All right. So, okay, then why don't you just, like the elder just said, why don't you just, find a short pier and take a long walk? And I hope you can't swim. Hit. It's like that, and that's the way it is. Huh. Daniel 11:2. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. We read it. Cambyses II, Bardia, which is also known as Pseudo-Smyrna. You had Darius I, and then it goes on to say, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. Now the 4th is dealing with, Xerxes the first, which you've heard Elder Pastor make mention of this time and time again. He's the main one that goes into that history of Xerxes in the movie 300, the king that you saw fight, speaking with Leonidas, and the one that came up against the whole realm of Grecia. It wasn't just the Israelites that were there, because Israelites did not run all of Greece at that time. You had some Japhites, you had Edomites up in there, and you had, Jakes up in there. All right? It all depends on what. So when the scriptures say here, and by his strength through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So he went from here, he started he started going into some history of Jake. Of course, we know that the Spartans, are Jakes, are Israelites from the Lacedaemonians, and he started going into other history. So he's saying that this was these Persian kings just coming up against Jake in that realm. No, you had Jake and you had Esau, and you still had some of those Japhetic people up in those lands, in those regions, the brown-skinned people of Japhet. And this is why they think that so-called white people today are from the seed of Japhet, because the Japhites, owned the places called Europe and those islands in the Mediterranean Sea. All right. Now, I was going to do this before I actually saw his video, but I saw he did the video. He did go through some of the history. He read some of the history on the kings, which I wanted to do, because what brought this to mind was when I first saw his videos. I didn't see the video yet. I didn't watch it. I didn't realize that there was different parts. I saw part 2, but I didn't know it was a part 2. I just saw Daniel chapter 11 something, and I sent it to a couple of brothers, and they asked me, you think it's on point? I said, I don't know. I just saw the title and I sent it. And then this morning when I woke up, I noticed when I started watching part 2, which part 2 is where he said Alexander, which I call Alexander the Creep. No, you don't. Not you may call him that now, but you didn't get that on your own. You didn't come up with that. That goes all the way back to 1 West, my dude. So I went back to part 1 and I watched part 1. I watched almost the whole thing. All right. So what I want to do is go through some of that history. But before we do that, matter of fact, no, let's do that. What I have here is all of these pages that I'm reading from, I put them in the description box. Kings of Persia, these 12 Achaemenid rulers led an empire. And it goes through Cyrus the Great, which was the first ruler of Persia. Then it goes to his son, Cambyses II, 530 to 522. And you could read some of the history here. It says Cambyses II was the eldest son of Cyrus and his beloved wife Cassandane. After the conquest of Babylon in 539 BC, this is when he took him down, Cambyses was appointed governor of northern Babylonia, a position he held for 9 months before being dismissed for unknown reasons. He later participated in Cyrus's ill-fated expedition against the Massagetae, but was sent home before his father's death. As king of Persia, Cambyses soon came into conflict with Egypt, the last great power in the Near East. Cambyses II at first worked to isolate Egypt from its allies in Greece and Caria, as well as seizing Cyprus, which served as an important Egyptian base. He also worked to subdue the approaches to Egypt through the Sinai. Cambyses II launched his Egyptian invasion in 525 BC, and despite fierce resistance, conquered the country. After several months, further campaigns added Cyrene and portions of Libya to the Persian Empire, but an invasion of Ethiopia failed. All right? So he conquered some of the regions. It says Cambyses II assumed the title of pharaoh and worked to reduce the power and privileges of the Egyptian temples. There is little evidence to suggest he engaged in the sacrilegious killing of Apis the bull. So you get the point. Then you have Bardia. This is Pseudo-Smyrna. All right, the son of Cyrus, the brother of Cambyses II, Bardia remains one of the most controversial kings of Persia. On his deathbed, Cyrus made Bardia satrap of the eastern provinces, while Cambyses II became king. According to later sources, shortly before his own death, Cambyses II had Bardia executed out of jealousy but kept it secret. While Cambyses was still away in Egypt, Bardia, or a Median magi named Guamata, pretending to be Bardia, began a revolt in Media, which soon spread to other parts of the empire since Cambyses II had been a despot. And this Bardia promised to remit all taxes for 3 years. He was greeted with open arms. Before Cambyses II could act, he died of an infected wound, and Bardia became undisputed king of Persia. So we see how that went down. Then you had Darius I the Great. Darius I was the eldest son of Hystaspes, satrap of Bactria, and rose to become the personal spear bearer of Cambyses II, originally from a much junior branch of the Achaemenids. The story of Darius I's rise to power is hazy at best. After the death of Cambyses II, Bardia, or the Magi Guamata, became king of Persia, but was assassinated by Darius I and his 6 companions. Following his ascension to the throne, Darius I faced revolts across the empire in Bactria, Babylonia, Elam, Media, Parthia, Assyria, and Egypt, which were suppressed with the aid, and these were all the so-called known world at the time. When you control these areas, you control an empire. Following this, Darius I led several military expeditions to complete the annexation of Egypt and incorporated much of Central Asia and the Indus Valley into the Persian Empire. He also launched a major expedition against the European Scythians, who he pursued into Thrace across the Danube, right? And you had Scythians, which were Jakes, and then eventually later on in the history, like everything Esau does, they assimilate into people's customs and traditions and act like they were the people of those lands, who he pursued into Thrace across the Danube and around the Black Sea. And you still have some of those Scythian people that are Jakes that are still among them, but some of them are not. And around the Black Sea, as far as the Volga River, after several months, he was forced to give up as the Scythians refused to give battle. So you get the idea of how he came into power. All right. So those were the three, the three that the angel spoke to Daniel about: Cambyses II, Bardia or Pseudo Smyrna, Darius I the Great, and then we read about the 4th king, which was far richer. The 4th shall be far richer than they all, right? And when we look back at that same list, this is the 4th king after the 3. The son of Darius I and Atosa, the daughter of Cyrus, Xerxes, was named as his father's successor prior to an expedition against rebels in Egypt. Though not the eldest son of Darius I, he ascended the throne as king of Persia on the basis of his mother's lineage and the fact that he was the first son born to Darius I after Darius I had become the king. After becoming king of Persia, Xerxes I ruthlessly suppressed revolts in Egypt and Babylonia before turning his attention to Greece. So you did have the Persian kings did fight with Greece, but the first real major online assault was done through Xerxes I. You had Cyrus the Great, as they call him. He had, conquered the Greek city-states of so-called Turkey, what's called so-called Turkey today. All right. Then eventually he lost that because, after his death, they took over that. And then you had Darius I, which was making expeditions against the Greeks, but they were losing. All right. So now we're dealing with his son, Xerxes I. Before turning his attention to Greece, Xerxes I spent 3 years gathering supplies and soldiers from across his empire, while also preparing roads and canals to assist the passage of his army. Salakia. After brief delays and the loss of part of his fleet at Thermopylae and Artemisium, because Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, this is where they had that battle with the Spartans. Xerxes I was able to capture and burn Athens. However, a reverse at the Battle of Salamis and word of unrest in Babylon caused Xerxes to withdraw along with most of his army. Yeah, because the Greeks were coming up into power, but they had Jake back then. You had a different groups of so-called Greeks back then, so you could understand. A second Persian defeat in Plataea in 479 BC ended Xerxes I's invasion of the Greek mainland. The fighting now spread across the Aegean and into Egypt and Cyprus, as well as known as the War of the Delian League. Which the Delian League, I believe those were the gathering together of those Greek city-states together. I'm just trying to get to the main point. All right. In 456 BC, Xerxes I was assassinated by Artabanus, commander of the royal bodyguard, after Artabanus was able to win support amongst the harem. So pretty much, this was the king that stirred up all against the realm of Grecia. That's why it says that after he suppressed Egypt and Babylon, he turned his attention to Greece. But he wasn't able to conquer the Greeks at the time, because eventually the Greeks will come later on, approximately maybe like 100 years later, or so, and pretty much take over the Persian Empire, because it would be their time to rule. Okay? So it goes on to say down here, the plot failed after the general Xerxes I is one of the most popular kings of Persia in literature, appearing in the biblical book of Esther. Aeschylus' play, The Persian, and numerous. Well, that's going into to different other things. But the main point is here: Xerxes I is one of the most popular kings of Persia in literature, appearing in the biblical book of Esther. And when you read the book of Esther, right? The first chapter, 1 and 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Now this Ahasuerus is the same as Xerxes I. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 107 and 20 provinces. So he had 127 states, so you could understand. So he was far richer than all the ones before him, because he conquered more lands and he had more tribute coming in, booty and all of that. Right, and it was that way because the Lord set him up to do that. To what? To fulfill prophecy. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. So when we go back to Daniel 11, and he said that this 4th king that shall be richer than they all, and by his strength of his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. That was talking about the realm of Grecia, period. Not just Jake. You had the Edomites that were up in there. You had the Japhetic people that were up in there. So he was fighting against all of them. Okay, because when you go back to the list of the Grecian kings, let me see, where is it at? Nope, that's the wrong one. This one. Around the time when Artaxerxes or Xerxes was around this time. Alexander I, Perdiccas II, and like I said, these could have been they could have been Japhetic kings, or they could have been Edomites that were just coming into that realm, taking over that area. Because we know that these are supposed to be their descendants. So they could have all been Edomites, or some of them could have been Japhetic, and they could have just assumed that position, just like the Ptolemaic dynasty assumed the throne of Egypt and set them up as the modern day pharaohs of that time. Okay, so dealing with the word Grecia, because like I said, he went to the book of Acts, the 11th chapter, eventually, to say that, see, the Grecians, yes, you had Jakes there, but this was not dealing with the whole. When he said he stirred up his all against the realm of Grecia, was not talking about just the Israelites. When we go to Daniel 10 and 20, this was Yahushai that came to Daniel. Actually, he fought against the Persian king. He was working on his mind. He called Michael, the archangel, to help him, because the kings back then had strong minds, unlike today, unlike Biden. So Daniel 10 and 20, it says, this is the angel explaining, this vision to Daniel. He said, then said he, knowest thou wherefore I came unto thee? Do you know why I'm here? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. Because the Persians were being stirred up to fight against the Greeks, because in process of time, the king, or the prince of Grecia, which is who? Let's go to Daniel 8 and 21, the goat. Daniel 8:21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. This is dealing with Alexander the Great, or Alexander the Creep, as we call him, not you. You call him that now, but that comes from one west. So keep it real, my dude. He didn't give any credit where he learned any of that stuff from. He well, somebody asked me the question, and I did the research, and this is what I came up with. Jake, boy, I tell you. So let's build off of that. This is First Maccabee 1 and 1, and it happened after that Alexander, the son of Philip, the Macedonian, because they were in the realm of Macedon. This is where Esau, this is my belief, that this is where Esau started to conquer so-called Europe from that point. Now, you could have had other Edomites in other realms, doing the same thing, but the history of the Edomites taking over the world began with Alexander the Creep, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes. And this Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes, was not Darius the first. This Darius, king of the Medes, was none other than Darius the third Kodomanos. All right, let's see if we can find him in here. Where is it? Right here, Darius the third Kodomanos, great-grandson of Darius the second. All right, so this is the king that Alexander beat. He beat him in two wars. He was under the impression that he was hoping that his men could deal with Alexander because he had other things going on. But then, since they couldn't, he fought against him in two different battles, and he lost both of the battles. And I believe this, they said this in the history, that once Alexander conquered him and there was nothing else to conquer, they said that he cried because there was nothing else to conquer. Why? Because that's what he was born to do. He was born to be a conqueror. He was given military strategies. He was venerated as one of the greatest generals in battle and strategy, that Esau venerates and extols to the clouds, And what movie was that? That was a series I was watching on the Ottoman Empire. And it said it was Vlad Tepes fighting against Mehmed II. Mehmed II was an Ottoman Turk, so-called. He was a convert to Islam, and there was one battle where, Vlad, was very slick, according to the series, and he would do like guerrilla type tactic warfare. He would attack unexpectedly, different times where you wouldn't expect the enemy to attack. And one night they did that, and pretty much they had the Ottomans pretty much on their heels. But then Mehmed II, set up something to where it countered, his strategy. And pretty much, the guy asked him, he said, well, how did you know that they would attack? He said, I didn't. He said, but, Alexander, he was talking about Alexander the Creep, did so-and-so and such with this and that and the other. So he studied strategies. And this is what those kings do. This is what those military men do. They study strategies. So he used something that Alexander the Creep did in order to rout out the Vlad and his armies, and that gave a devastating blow to them, which they weren't able to really recover from that, according to the series. All right, so there's a lot of history. So, building off of this, Grecia again. When we go to the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 6, it says, "The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold unto the Grecians." These are talking about the actual Edomites that took over Greece. All right. So that term Grecian doesn't always apply to Jake. Now, when we read the New Testament, when we go to the New Testament in the book of Acts, the 6th chapter, in the book of Acts 11, I think it appears 3 times. This Grecians, see, and this is why you can't just go into the New Testament and just go by, okay, the word world, we're going to go to the Old Testament, we're going to go to the New Testament. The word mark, we're going to go to the Old Testament, we're going to go to the New Testament. No, because it depends on how it's written or what the meaning of it is. You can't just go by the English, equivalent of it. It doesn't always work like that. You have to know what these words mean in their original language in order to be able to tie things together. This is how we know to tie the M-A-R-K of Revelation 13, the charagma, with the M-A-R-K-S of Leviticus, the 19th chapter, the word kwai in the Hebrew, because they're synonymous with each other. But just because you have a word that is spelled the same, sounds the same, don't mean you can match it from the Old Testament to the New Testament. It all depends on the context. So Acts 6:1, "And in those days when the number of the disciples were multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians." These Grecians were Israelites, Greek-speaking Jews, against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now when we look up the word Grecians, in this case, in the New Testament, Hellenistas or Hellenistes, it says a Hellenist, one who imitates the manners of the customs of the worship of the Greeks and the use of the Greek tongue, used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. You see? New Testament, not Old Testament. So this scripture here in Daniel 11:2, when it says that he stirred up all against the kingdom of the realm of Grecia, is not just talking about the Jakes that were there. It's talking about the Edomites that were there. It's talking about the Japhetic people that were there. Whoever was there that was in control of those lands at the time, that's who this Persian king Xerxes I stirred up everything against. But he didn't win, that particular, this particular battle, because the Lord did not allow him to destroy the Greeks, because the Greeks would come back about 100 years later or so and be the ones to take over that whole realm, as we read in the book of 1 Maccabees, the 1st chapter, the 1st verse. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, because he's the one that consolidated all of those Greek city-states, which were all divided. And he consolidated them all, and they brought the fight to the Persians, and guess what? They won. Now this was about 100 years later, after, about 100 plus years later, after Xerxes I. All right, but you did have Edomites back then in that region that were fighting against them. It wasn't just Jake. You got to get that out of your head. All right, it says, "And made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth." Why? Because it was their time to rule. It was time for the Third Empire to come into play, the Greeks. All right, "And went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him." In other words, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't resist him. Whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. All right. "And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him." Why? Because the Lord gave him the power. It was his time to rule. Let's go real quick to the book of Psalms 75:5. It says, "Lift not up your horn on high." What does the horn represent in scripture? If it's not talking about something physical, which is not here, it's talking about power. So it says, lift not lift not up your power on high. Speak not with a stiff neck. Don't be proud, because when these devils conquer and take over, their heart gets lifted up because they think that they're doing it of their own power. But it's the Most High swinging the hammer, fool. It says, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. Right. So you're not going to be promoted into that position unless it's given to you from on high. A man can receive nothing except it be given from heaven. But the Most High is the judge, because he's the one mustering the host of the battle. He's the one calling the shots. He's the one saying, okay, this kingdom only has so much to rule. The age of this kingdom is so and so, such and such. Then the next one will come in, because the Medo-Persian Empire really only ruled conjointly or together for about 200 years, from about 539 BC to about 330 BC. And then 330 BC, that was a cutoff date. Darius III, Kodomanos, did what he did. He got his ass handed to him a couple of times. And then he got put to death. And guess what? Boom. Then it was time for the next contender to come up. The next champions, which were the Greeks. Then after a certain period of time, around 27, 25 BC, that's when the Greek Empire was totally absolved. And because the last stronghold of the Greeks, if I'm not mistaken, was the Egyptians when they ruled Egypt, and they were absorbed into the Roman Empire around 27, 25 BC. Last ruler being Ptolemy the 13th, with his sister Cleopatra the 7th, because there was a line of Cleopatras. Those are Edomites. All right, they were not Jakes. I'm sorry, they were not Hamites. They were Edomites from around 3-something BC all the way down to that point. They were all Edomites that were sitting on the Pharaoh's seat, calling themselves pharaohs. All right. That's why sometimes you'll see pharaohs that look like so-called white people or Edomites, because they took over that region or that realm. And why is it so hard for people to believe that the small hats today are not the people of the Lord, when that's all Esau does? They get into a place. We know, if you have a head on your shoulders, you know that the original Egyptians or Mizraim were people of color, so-called black. They weren't the Israelites, but they were brown-skinned people. They had woolly hair. And then around 3-something BC, that whole makeup changed. The rulers started to be looking like white people. So why is it so hard to believe that these devils just assimilate into people's cultures and their customs and their religions and just take over and act like they're the people? The Ottoman Empire, same thing. The religion of Islam is to so-called Arabs, which are brown-skinned people, and then they came up in there and they converted to it, and now you see a whole lot of pale-looking so-called Arabs. Not all of them are Edomites. Some of them are Ishmael, but they assimilate into things. They take over things. They're not the originators of anything. They're just the thieves and culture vultures of every nation on the planet. Come on, people. It says, "For the Most High is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another." All right. So, the brother was partly right, but he was partly wrong. Because when the Xerxes I stirred up all against the realm of Grecia, you had Jakes there, a la the Spartans, but you also had Edomites up in there, and I'm pretty sure you also had Japhet, because remember, it took a while to get Japhet out of those lands. And he mentioned the Minoans, because we spoke about the Minoans. I've actually done several lessons on Minoans and Japhet. You also have the Etruscans. You type in Etruscans, the original Etruscan terracottas, which were brown-skinned people with big noses. Then you had the Picts, which the Romans call them Picts, short for pictorial, which the word pictorial means pictures, because they used to paint tattoos on themselves, just like the so-called Polynesians today, Hawaiians, so on and so forth. They paint the tattoos on them. Those were the original Japhetic people, all right, of those lands of so-called Europe. before the so-called white men and Edomites got up in there. Okay? So all of this is history, you know. So with that, you know, I pray that you brothers and few sisters were edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.